Welcome back. Till now, we have seen configuration using XML and also configuration using annotations. When we were using configuration using annotations, you understood how to use component annotation, service annotation, repository annotation, auto wired, resource annotation, etc. But were we successful in eliminating the XMLs completely? No. So let me show you. This is a start project which I'm working on. Here is my XML. Two XMLs are there. We are having XMLs. Now the idea is why to use the .xml files as a configuration files. Why can't we use .java files as a configuration files? That is the idea. So let me just start step by step. What I'll do is I'll try to just remove this .xml files completely. In that, a first step is to write a Java configuration file, a configuration file using Java. So I'm writing a new class. I'll use a base package com.way-to-learn online, and here I'll write something like application config.java. Finish. So this is a Java class. To tell that this Java class is a configuration file, you have to annotate it with configuration. So any class annotated with configuration is a configuration file. Okay. Now in my XML, I have a bean tag where I'm defining this configuration, these beans, and this is dependent on data source. Okay. Let us go to data source bean. So in this, I have configured a data source bean like this. Now what I can do is in this configuration file, the equivalent of bean tag is to write a method public. The return type is data source. Data source from java x.sql. The method name I'm giving it as data source, and here I can write the logic basic data source is equals to new basic data source. Okay, then let me return this. Okay, so in the XML I was setting driver class name, URL and all. So I'll do the same by using Java code. Data source dot setter, I'm doing setter injection. Set driver class name. Driver class name is this is the driver class name. I'm hard coding right now. Slowly we'll externalize it. Data source dot set URL. I'll copy paste this URL. Then username and password. Okay, I have a method now. I have to annotate it with bean to tell that this method is a bean definition. So in the XML, we are giving the bean tag, ID and class name, and configuring for setter injection. So we did the same here. But what is the bean ID? By default, if you don't specify any bean ID, the method name will be taken as a bean ID. Or if you want to specify the bean name, yep, you can specify name is equals to say ds. So if you have observed name is of what type? String array. That means you can give comma separated bean names. You can give more than one bean name as well. So as of now I want to go with defaults. Okay, so these are bean tag. This bean method, a method annotated with bean, is equivalent to writing this bean tag. So I will delete this bean tag. Slowly we'll go step by step. These two are there, we'll see what is the equivalent of it. As of now I will just ignore it. Now coming to application-config, here I have configured JDBC account repository IMPL. So corresponding to it, I will write one method, public, return type is account repository, and I'll create an object of JDBC account repository IMPL. Account repository IMPL is equals to, see, this constructor is taking data source, so I'll call this data source method. So here, by calling this method annotated with bean, I am doing constructor injection. So I don't need to do anything else as well. Return it. That's it. Similarly, I have to write the bean definitions for all other beans as well. I'll pause my video and I'll complete it for saving. Yep. If you see, I have configured here JDBC account repository bean, reward repository bean. For this also I have injected data source by calling that corresponding method, transaction repository, and injected data source, email service bean, and finally you have seen bank service bean, where I'm calling all the corresponding methods, the bean methods. So we have configured everything equivalent to this XML. Now what I can do is I can delete this XML. Okay, I will try to even I'll try to delete this, even if it is not required. I have deleted it. Let this be there. We are not using it anyway as of now. Let this be there. We'll use it next. Now to write the test case. Earlier in test case, we were creating class path XML application context, but now we are not using XML, and the XML is also not in class path. So what we have to do is we have to create an object of annotation config application context. Annotation config application context. Instead of class path XML application context, we have to use this one. Is equals to new annotation config application context. This is a constructor which is taking a class object for all the annotated classes. So I'll pass application config dot class. That's it. And now context dot get bean bank service. What's the bean name? Yeah, bank service. So everything else should work the same. These are the only two changes. Let me run if it works properly or not. Before that, let me check if database is there or not. I think the database is down on my machine. Let me check. Yeah, data source problem. So I'll just pause my video and I'll start. Okay, now I will run this. My database is ready. Again it is saying database problem. Okay, I'll not close this context. Okay, so let me run now. See, the test case passed. So I have eliminated the .xml file. Now I'm not using .xml file. Okay, now let us refactor this configuration file. If you see, the infrastructure related beans are in this XML file. I want to separate them. So I want more than one configuration file. I will write one more new class infrastructure config. And the same thing, and I'll annotate this also with configuration. Now I'll move this data source into infrastructure. Okay, now what I could do is see, here I was calling the data source method. Right now the data source method is not available. So what I can do, I can create a variable private data source and I will auto wire it. So here I can, instead of calling the method, I'm just using this field. So let me just modify all. So if you have a bean defined in another configuration file, you can use auto wired and it will get injected there and you can use it. But now what you can do is, since there are two .java files, two configuration files, one way is you can write an import and value is equals to an array of classes. You can import n number of classes. So I'll import infrastructure config dot class. So this application config is a main class and I have imported infrastructure config. Now in test case, I am creating an application context by using application config only. So let us see if it still works. Yep, it worked. So this is one way. So where you are saying application config is a main file, or if you don't want to use import, then how to tell about the infrastructure config? I didn't use import. Let me run. It should fail because data source bean will not be there. It failed. It is saying no qualifying bean of type data source found. So what I have to do is I have to give comma separated class files, infrastructure config dot class. So if you have multiple configuration files, you can give all the comma separated files here while creating application context. Yeah, you achieved the same. Now here I was hard coding the values. I don't want to hard code this value. I want to give the placeholder. So I have a dot properties file here, db-prod.properties as of now, or as of now I will rename it to say db.properties. I have right now db.properties and here I'll point it to SpringDB. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to load from that dot properties file. So if you want to load any dot properties files and if you want this key value page to be added to the environment variables, what you can do is you can annotate the configuration file with property source, and this takes the name. I'll give class path colon db dot properties. Okay, so what this annotation will do is if you write this, it will load this db.properties and all the key value pairs will be loaded as environment variables. And in Spring, there's a class called as environment. So I'll just create private environment. and I will use auto void. So whatever environment variables are there, if you want to access, you can access them through this environment. So these db.properties are also loaded into this environment. You can treat it as like a properties object, java.util.properties object. Now here what you can do is, instead of hard coding, you can say env environment dot get property, and if I pass a key, what is the key here? db dot driver class name. And db dot url, db dot user, db dot password. Similarly here also I will replace. Here it is db dot url, db dot user, and db dot password. Okay, so I have externalized the configuration to a properties file and I'm loading it from the environment. Now let me run the same test case and check if it still works. Yes, the test case has passed, it works. Okay, but again here I have db.properties. What if I want to load the properties files for different environments differently, dynamically? So I can use a placeholder here as well, db dash dollar my env dot properties. Okay, dollar, and we have to pass this dollar my env through as an environment variable. Through command line we can pass, as you know. So one thing here, I have db, I'll replace this db dot properties with db dash prod dot properties, and in src test resources I have db dash test dot properties. So in db dash test dot properties I have given a different db name which is not existing. Okay. So let's run this right now. Don't worry about this right now. I am creating an application context using both, and okay. So while running the test case, I had to pass the environment variable. You know how to do it. Right click, run as, run configurations, and in the arguments dash d my env is equals to prod. Let me check if it works. Oh, could not resolve the placeholder my env. One minute again. Here in VM arguments again. Now you can see everything ran. It had to give that environment variable as VM argument, not as program argument. Okay, so you understood how to externalize configurations. Suppose if I pass that $my env as test, I should get an exception because the database name I gave, which is not existing. So I'll give my env is equals to test, apply and run. I should get an exception. See, database is not existing, so I got an exception. Unknown database. See, this database does not exist. So now you understood that based on the environment variable, it is picking up from the appropriate dot properties file. Okay. Now, few more things I would like to show you in Java configuration. What I did earlier was I have this data source auto-wired. Instead of auto-wiring it, what you could do is you can make your method to take data source as argument. Data source. Okay, data source. Data source. 1 minute, let me import it. Okay, so if your method annotated with bean is taking any argument, the application context will try to find a bean by type and it will pass this method. So this is also another way. Okay, but the better way is to use auto-wired. I just want to show you the alternative as well, so that's why I showed you. Okay, now you understood how to do how to use a bean defined in another file here. Either you can use auto-wired or you can pass that as a method argument as well. Okay, now next thing, how do you specify bean definition as singleton? Is it by default singleton? Yes, by default, all the bean definitions should be singleton in Spring, right? Yes, all the bean definitions are singleton. If I want to specify a bean as prototype, I have to specify like this scope. I have to use annotation scope, and I have to specify prototype. These are you can specify the bean as prototype. Otherwise, if you don't specify anything, by default, it is singleton. Okay. Okay, I want to tell one more thing. In XML, we were using this tag JDBC namespace initialize database, and we're giving the script location. So I told you that the script will be automatically executed. So what is the equivalent of this tag in Java configuration? So firstly, what you need to do is you need to write the Java code. So firstly, to get this script as a resource in your infrastructure config, you need to write this annotation, value annotation. You have to create a variable of type resource and then use value annotation. So for this dbscripts.sql, a resource object will be created and it will be injected into this dbscript. Then you have to write one more method called as data source initializer, which takes data source. So here we are creating data source initializer. We are injecting data source into it. And then for this initializer, we are setting a populator, database populator. So this is one more bean database populator where I'm creating resource database populator and I'm adding a script. So this populator is having some methods which can execute this script on a given data source. So these are the configurations which we need to do, which is equivalent to XML configuration of JDBC colon initialize database. Let me show you through code. So in infrastructure config, I need to do that both. So I'll copy paste for saving some time. I have that already in my solution. So I'll copy paste this. dbscripts.sql, where is it? Is it in class path dbscripts? Yep, here in test resources it is there anyway. Okay, then the next one, here are the data source initializers, whatever I've shown in my presentation. So here I'll copy paste. Okay, So I have injected resource object, and then I am using this data. I'm configuring this data source initializer as I have shown. Right. So in my database, let me show you my database, SpringDB. Earlier the database was already there, so it was working. Now SpringDB, I will drop it. And then I'll recreate the SpringDB. Okay. Now, if I run this test case, the tables should be created by executing the script and it should pass. Oh, what is it again? Oh, I'm passing test as an environment variable. I'll just go to here and I'll pass prod. See, it is created, and and who is executing this DB scripts? Something like scriptutils is executing this DB scripts. So the tables are also created. Let me just go and check there. Yes, they are created. Is it? So that's how it works. Now I have some few questions. I told you that bean definition is singleton. Is it? So suppose if I have one more, if I'm referencing the same, if I'm calling the same method twice, what will happen? Or to give a clarity, let me just take this data source bean here just for explanation purpose. So I've taken it here. I'll comment out this data source auto void bean as of now. I'll take this environment also there as of now. Okay. Now here you have a data source method, and to inject it, I have to call the method is it. This is what we did earlier also. Now, how many times am I calling this data source bean? How many times am I calling? 3 times. So how many objects of data source are created? 3 or 1? Just think for a while. I'm calling a method. So whenever a method is called, this is executed. That means an object is created. But I was telling that any bean method, any method annotated with bean, by default, this bean definition is a singleton. How is it possible? So what happens is exactly whenever you are creating an application context at runtime, a subclass of your application config will be created, something like this. A proxy class will be created, something like $my config extends. What is my class? Application config. So my configuration class will be extended. This is my configuration class, application config. A subclass of it will be automatically created by using a library called as cglib library. This actually is proxy which is being created, and all the methods are overridden. So data source method public data source is overridden. What is the logic inside the overridden method? Now it will check if data source is already present inside the application context. If data source is not present in application context, then it will call if not present. If the data source is not present in application context, that means if this method is called only once, it will call super dot data source and it'll get the data source. Then what it'll do, it'll put, okay, anyway, super.data source is called, that means data source bin is created. So if the data source is not present in the application context, then only super.data source is called. That means my method is called only for the first time. Once it is called for the first time, then the application context will keep this data source. The data source bin is created once. The data source will be kept inside application context. So once this method called data source method is called again, this if block will not be executed. It will return the data source from the application context. So whenever you are having any class annotated with configuration, a subclass will be created at runtime. Who will create the subclass? Application context will create this dynamic proxy at runtime, and it has all the methods are overridden, and the super method, the method in super class is called only if the bin is not yet created. For the first time only super.data source, super.method will be called. So that's how the application context will make sure that all your bin definitions are singleton, right? If you have specified a method as prototype like this, then for this method it will not override. Okay, so the application context will take care of making sure that each bin definition is singleton. So now you understood about Java configuration till now, some basics. We'll see the rest of the concepts about the next topic in next video. So what you may have to do is you have to just go through this documentation 08 Java config and complete the lab exercises. You have to start working on this Java config start project. See you in next video.